Welcome back to Mika's awesome Autism Awareness Acceptance Extravaganza. If you haven't already watched it, part 1 is linked in the description, so off you go. Before we begin, I'm Mika and I usually make video essays about politics, philosophy and neurodiversity, all from a leftist autistic perspective. So if that's your kind of jam, then I suggest you subscribe and hit the bell. Last week we talked about autism awareness and the campaigns that go along with it, but this week we're talking about society. That means you. You're a society. Is there something important you think people forget when it comes to the intersectional nature of autism and other identities, and how does that affect you personally?
And this is a really interesting question because I do think some people tend to have it in their head that when it comes to mental health, people who have things like ADHD, anxiety, and they're also trans, a lot of people outside our communities have this idea that being trans is because you have autism or because you have ADD. I'm personally autistic and I'm also trans. I'm not trans because I'm autistic. I'm not autistic because I'm trans. These are two very distinct experiences that I have every single day and inform how I perceive the world and myself. But the two of those it's not like causation. Because I have one, it doesn't automatically mean I'm going to have the other. And I think that's something that just with more time and more education, people will start to understand that autism is not necessarily this thing that causes other conditions to happen. They can all coexist together, but being autistic does not automatically mean you're going to be something else.
Personally, I identify as human first and foremost, yet people seem to forget that we're human and we're not just our autism. Autism doesn't define me, it's just a different neurotype that allows me to think and experience differently than my fellow NT brothers and sisters. I am so much more than my neurotype, in the same way that a neurotypical is more than their neurotype. I'm sassy, sarcastic, cheeky, and have a lot of personality. I can also be quiet, introverted, wanting my own space, and just like anyone else, I express a wide range of emotions and feelings. Just like you, I'm a layered creation of art with many facets and complexities, and autism is just one part of this masterpiece that is me.
There's a concept that I learned recently called neuroqueer, which is this idea that neurodiversity and queerness are very much bound up together. Because if you're neurodiverse, that means your brain works differently than abled people. And a lot of us seem to be much more adept at seeing that gender is kind of bullshit. And that's very important. It makes a lot of sense and people don't realize that. Also, of course, there's the intersection, of course, between class and neurodiversity, and how, in order to combat my anxiety and depression, which has been caused by a society that keeps telling me I'm bad because I'm neurodiverse and because I'm autistic, I am on medical marijuana more or less 24/7. But that comes because I have the class privilege in order to buy all that THC tincture, which is very expensive. And so that's another important thing too, is that there very much is an access gap to treatment.
Sometimes it feels like there's the disconnect between people who are just neurodivergent and people who also have chronic illnesses, or people who just have chronic illnesses. And that actually confused me at first, before I knew I had autism. I hear about people who are autistic who didn't want a cure, and I was coming from having a condition where it was basically just pain, and I wanted a cure for that. So the concept sort of the social model kind of confused me a little bit. I had that happen where I said something about I'm fine with the neurodivergent stuff. I wouldn't want a cure for that, which wouldn't even really be possible, I don't think. But I want a cure for my stuff that's literally just pain. And I feel sometimes somebody told me your pain is from society, and it's okay, society definitely doesn't make it any better, but no, I have physical pain things as well. And there's a lot of us who have both, who have physical pain problems and neurodivergence. And I don't know, there can be a frustration there, I feel between people who don't understand both and the nature of both.
Is the neurodiversity movement a civil rights movement? Why?
Neurodiversity is a fact of life, but society just doesn't realise it yet. The societies we live in thrive on standardisation and conformity. The idea that everyone thinks and feels the same is a useful one, and a very tempting one to stick to. But it simply isn't true. Sadly, it's been the cornerstone of civilization for so long that challenging it is a mountainous task. And just like other harmful assumptions about people, the only way to prove it is by unified action. When thousands of people are united with one voice, saying the same thing which challenges the status quo, they become a civil rights movement, whether they're organised or not. Neurodiversity is a fact of life, and it is a beacon of hope. But to be accepted as reality by everyone, it takes a civil rights movement to prove the point.
I fully believe we are sort of a modern civil rights movement because neurodiversity is something that affects people of every skin color. Regardless of where you come from, there is always going to be a percentage of people in that population who are neurodivergent. And right now we live in a world that was built for neurotypical people. Like if you look at capitalism itself and say we zoom in to retail. I work in retail, I'm trying to get out, and the way this entire corporate structure works is they expect you to be able to perform to a certain degree. They expect you to be able to interact with guests on a certain level, and they expect you to do certain things that a lot of neurodivergent people just are completely unable to do. But because you cannot work and allow yourself to be exploited the way that they want to exploit you, they see you as less worthy of being exploited by them as others. So not only do you not get a paycheck, society basically leaves you behind completely. And I think that the only way we're ever going to have a society that's even remotely ethical is if it's built to allow people of all kinds to contribute to work within it, and it's actually built by those people, which as long as the current structure of America exists, it's not going to happen. I advocate all the time for the abolition of every structure that oppresses any one type of person. And hopefully, over the coming years and decades, that will become more just nomenclature among everyone instead of something that's like, socialism's scary, because I'm getting real tired of that.
I think the neurodiversity movement absolutely is a civil rights movement. I would argue it's a disability movement. Not that everyone with neurodiversity necessarily feels they're disabled. But I think that alone actually adds to the discussion. It adds an extra layer of nuance, because I think a lot of times with disability, people get focused on specific things, like maybe physical disabilities, for example. So I think neurodiversity brings to the table other civil rights.
Well, yeah, of course it is. Disabled people, and specifically neurodiverse people, are a systemically oppressed people. Systemic ableism, I'm not sure if I'm the first person to use this, but it takes the idea of systemic racism and applies it to ableism. And of course those two things can intersect and do intersect often. It's a civil rights issue because systemic ableism is a thing, and we need to be fighting against it. We need to dismantle the unjust hierarchy that is ableism.
We do need rights, but I think that we really need kind of like just an entire like societal restructuring in a lot of ways. I think that just the very way that society is structured is very difficult for people who are neurodivergent. I don't think that capitalism comes very naturally to us. Injustice does not come naturally to us at all, and like a lot of us struggle a lot with things being very unjust. I mean, the way that the system is set up now is kind of, those injustices are so commonplace, and they aren't really even like flaws in the system. They aren't bugs, they're features. And I think that is inherently very difficult for us, not to mention that like a lot of us can't work in the very specific ways that people are expected to. School is basically every neurodivergent person, every disabled person I know full stop has some kind of trauma from school, but especially neurodivergent people. I'd say it's a civil rights movement, but I think that like we kind of need to go farther.
What features would your dream society have?
My dream society would have a global understanding that autism, and any neurodiversity for that matter, is just a different neurotype, and it's equally as valid as a neurotypical neurotype. I'd also hope that when a child is born, they are giving their neurotype and no child is born undiagnosed. I think this would be very helpful so that a child can begin their life knowing exactly how they are, and they can, as the years go by, they can get to know more about themselves, more about their neurotype, and what makes them different and what makes them unique. Because so many of the struggles and issues that people go through, purely because they don't know that they're on the spectrum, could have been prevented if they were diagnosed earlier.
Simple. Equality, fairness, and honesty.
How much time do you have? Because there have been, and I could write a whole book on, what my dream, fully automated luxury queer space anarcho-communist society would look like. But if we're talking about specifically in terms of issues of neurodiversity and autism, first off, we would have to dismantle the unjust hierarchy that is ableism. Now, there's a lot to it. You'd have to abolish commodity production, and that's pretty big in and of itself. You'd have no money, no markets, no artificial valuation on work. Value people for people, not because they create products. So for me, anti-ableism and Dream Society is bound up with not just socialism in general, but a specific type of non-commodified socialism. And there needs to be a massive investment in technologies that allow ableds to speak to so-called low-functioning autistic people. I prefer the term abled passing, because high and low functioning is ableist. I could just go on. But mainly, ableism gotta go smashy.
I think that a lot of us are drawn to the concept of no hierarchy, no state. If you view the state as the apparatus that has a monopoly on the force of violence or the use of violent force. And if you think of anarchism in the kind of Noam Chomsky way of no unjust hierarchies, I think that comes super naturally to a lot of us. I feel like that's obvious to me, and I feel like that's obvious to a lot of us, that a lot of the systems we've built up don't make sense. They were just kind of responses to, we need something to, this is a problem, so we need some kind of response, instead of restructuring things so that they're more sensible. My real dream society, a part of me kind of feels like fully automated luxury communism, which is this concept where one day we could get to the point where technology can handle all of the necessary work that's necessary to live, and then people would be free to do whatever. A part of me kind of feels like disabled people who can't work will always kind of face some level of, if not societal ableism, then some people will be kind of resentful of the fact that some people can't work, thinking that they don't have to work, instead of no, they can't work.
Just way less authoritarian, a flatter hierarchy. I just want, but I guess a big focus for me would be starting with child liberation is a big thing for me as a parent. And it's something I think about that would maybe have the most impact as far as bettering our future, because I think a lot of harmful things I don't like about our society are ingrained in us or seen as acceptable from how we treat young people, and the fact that we also experience that as young people.
What do you find to be the most oppressive part of autistic life in neurotypical society?
So this kind of goes off of what I mentioned as far as capitalism being highly antithetical to neurodivergent people. We are not compatible with one another. But it also goes beyond that, because if you look at, say, education, the way my teachers treated me in school made me feel like I was broken, or there were certain things I just could not grasp. They made me feel like I wasn't up to the standards of other students. But it's because at the time I had ADHD, still have it, and I struggle with gender dysphoria and autism, but those two things, I didn't realize that's what they were at the time. So I thought I was functioning like a normal human being, and I was bullied constantly. I was bullied even by teachers. who would look at me and say like, why are you not able to do these simple things? And I'm over here like, I don't know. There aren't spaces for us. And I think probably the most oppressive thing is that we are not allowed to function, not just like we want to, but like we need to. We need to be given the freedom to stem, to be able to have a meltdown when we need to, and release that energy that needs to be released. You cannot put someone with a certain type of mental illness in any setting and tell them you cannot act on any triggers or anything that you're used to that you need to keep yourself stable mentally. You're essentially keeping them in a prison and saying you're not allowed to do the things that bring you relief, and we're also not going to help you ever. And it's just like, it's heartbreaking knowing how much difficulty we face when it comes to the job sector, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, when it comes to housing, like literally any part of society. This society was not built for people like myself. And until that changes, we're going to be facing some of these problems over and over again.
Being disbelieved and being judged by standards that don't apply to me. Like many autistic people, I'm scrupulously honest to the point of being blunt. The typical reaction to that honesty is either disbelief or hostility, and that has caused me more trouble in my life than anything else. It made my childhood a misery, has broken friendships and relationships, and even cost me jobs.
I personally don't feel oppressed. However, I think the most oppressive part in many autistic people's lives is the fact that we ourselves as a community don't stand up for ourselves, and we don't put our foot down, and we don't pave the way for the things that we need, such as different ways of doing things, different structures, different dynamics in the workplace, in healthcare settings, even in day-to-day relationships with the people around us. I think when it comes to oppression, especially in the modern society that we live in, the ones who have the right to create change is the ones who are being oppressed. So I feel like no one can truly hold us down or hold us back or say that we can't do this, we can't do that. If we stand together and we stand united and we confidently push forward what needs to change within society.
I think that this kind of changes based on my age and where I am in life. So like as a kid, it was all of the expectations put on. No, I think in general, it's expectations. And I've said for a long time that I think a lot of ableism has this issue of either you are deemed, people expect that you can do things you can't, or people expect that you can't do things that you can. And I think that both are really frustrating. I guess more specifically, oppressive part of autistic life, there are a lot of like social obligations in the way that we view social stuff and the way that we view, like I'm 27 and I've never dated anybody, and there's a part of me that's like, I'm lonely, I'd like to date somebody, but like there's a bigger part of me that's like, and because that feels like too high of an age to have not like done a thing, to not have like ticked off a check mark, that's what makes me feel weird about it. You know, it's the social imperative to do things maybe we don't want to do, or maybe we can't do, or maybe, you know, whatever.
The most oppressive part of being autistic, that's tough. I mean, the social stuff is definitely a big aspect of that. Just little things, miscommunications and assumptions that get made based on having reactions that people don't understand, whether that's like taking things literally or differences in eye contact or other nonverbal communication. Yeah, I guess that would be the biggest thing. And then again, that starts early, like even as kids, it becomes a huge focus. And so I think, you know, most of us grow up with quite a bit of trauma, whether we got help or not early on. Yeah.
Do you think the autistic community should be more political? Why?
I mean, yes. A, there's the fact that literally everything is political. B, because neurodiverse and autistic liberation can't happen without concerted, direct action on, you know, the political arena, whether it's electoral politics, advocacy, propaganda. We need to be Especially because a lot of the left is still ableist. I mean, so much of the left is very workerist in nature. That is, they think of workers not the proletariat, not, including people who can't work. Everyone needs to be more political. Gain class consciousness. Realize that systemic ableism, systemic racism, and all these intersections are things that gotta be destroyed.
Yes, absolutely. I think, honestly, being openly autistic in America and being willing to address the ways that we are affected, not just by capitalism, but also by American society in general, to be willing to speak out about these things is an inherently political act. So whenever I make videos about the trans experience, that is an inherently political thing, because I am speaking out as a member of a marginalized group, and I'm directly confronting the oppression that we face every single day. I'm criticizing the structures that led to that oppression, and I'm giving solutions for how we can change the world for the better. Even just existing openly is itself a political act, and I think it's exactly the same for people like myself who are autistic, or people who have BPD, or struggle with narcissistic personality disorders. Like any type of mental illness, we need that visibility, and we need them to be more accepted, instead of being portrayed as they're portrayed in like movies or TV, as people who are dysfunctional or are likely to be serial killers or things like this. Like we have to stop painting people like myself as either threats to society or being broken, non-functional people, whatever it is. We have to do what we can to speak up and keep speaking up as a community, so that way we can change the way that society perceives us.
I definitely think the autistic community should be more political. I do think there's some, but it does feel like in general, a lot of the autistic community is less political than a lot of the disabled community, which seems odd. I think part of this has to do with where a lot of money for autism and stuff has come from, and trying to be accepted, that being political can be frowned upon. And so you see a lot of organizations try to stay kind of, neutral, so to speak, being political, which I think is nonsense. Obviously, like, you can't really do that, but that's the appearance they go for. So, you're trying to attract like the biggest fan base, so to speak, I guess.
Thank you so much for watching, and please remember to go and check out all the creators you've met today. I'll be getting back to my politically charged content next month, so subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of that, and come follow me on things. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time. This video is only possible thanks to the continued support of my patrons. If you enjoy my content, please consider signing up to become a patron for early releases, resources, and updates. Thank you to all who have already. It really means the world.